Tonight on Arena, Abie Philbin Bowman on his Fringe Festival show, Lawrence Norfolk on his latest novel, John Saturnal's Feast, and 3 new albums up for review. The Revolution will be televised, retweeted and available on 4oD is the title of a new show written by and being performed by Abie Philbin Bowman as part of the Absolute Fringe Festival. Abie is with me in studio this evening. What is the Revolution all about? What are you revolting about?
Well, I'm revolting on many levels, Sean, which I'm sure your listeners will appreciate. But what it's about, well, it's a wonderful a melee of whatever's happening in the world right now, because it's the nature of topical humour and comedy. And I've been writing jokes about Kate Middleton today, and yesterday I was writing jokes about the blasphemy in the Middle East, and before that I was writing jokes about Mitt Romney, and that's the nature of how this works. But what the sort of overall theme is that, you know, we're looking at the world at the moment, and you know, like most Irish people, we all grew up hearing about 800 years of British oppression. But that ended in the 1920s, at least in this part of the island. And at that point, the Irish people basically turned to the Catholic Church and went, your turn. And for the last 90 years, they've been in charge. And then finally we're standing up to the church, and then the IMF have arrived and are telling us how we should run our country. And to paraphrase Oscar Wilde, to be colonised once may be considered unfortunate. To be colonised twice looks like carelessness. But to be colonised for a third time, like, is it something we're wearing? Like, what are the Irish doing wrong? I mean, did we get really drunk one night and read 50 Shades of Grey and go on some weird Facebook page going, hey, listen, I know we seem like we're mad enough for the crack, but we actually love being dominated. We're in the Atlantic. Come find us. So it's wondering why we keep being oppressed like this, why this keeps happening. And then also, you know, you look on the news and you see that, you know, in Libya, there's the Arab Spring, and in Egypt, and now there's protests and riots about this film. You've got people in Greece burning down Athens. You've got the Indignados in Spain, and nothing is happening in Ireland. And you go, why is that? And then you realise we just don't have the weather for it. Which we don't. But it's about protest and revolution and how change happens and why it doesn't happen in some places, and trying to get to the heart of that.
American politics seems to be an area where you find great fun, both in the persons of Rick Santorum and Mitt Romney. Are they the only figures of fun you can find over there?
Oh, God, no. There's so many. I mean, American politics is kind of this wonderful gift, as you for a comedian. Rick Santorum, who was the guy running against Mitt Romney earlier this year, who's since dropped out, he dropped out, and the day that happened, like, as a human being, I was delighted. But as a comedian, I was absolutely heartbroken. Like, I was like, oh, but he's such good, I mean,
good material.
I mean, you know yourself that aluminium is a base metal, which is spelled by the Americans aluminum. And similarly, a sanatorium is a place for crazy people, which is spelled by the Americans Santorum. And like, Rick Santorum just came up with these wonderfully mad things, like the thing Satan is attacking America. And you go, he's a Republican, and when Republicans say Satan's attacking America, the next thing they're going to say is that Satan's an unelected dictator, which of course he is. Then they're going to hear that Satan's torturing his own people. And pretty soon the price of brimstone hits $200 a barrel. And after that, they're talking about a ground invasion of hell, you know. And obviously they mean well, but as we all know, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And it's chaos. And so he would give you these gifts as a comedian, you know. And it's okay, by the way, any military action in hell will be vetoed by Russia and China, no matter how bad Satan actually is. So he gives you great material. And then Mitt Romney, I've only sort of really got to understand Mitt Romney in the last week or so. Someone sent me a brilliant link to a thing. This is a bit long now, but it's a thing on Rolling Stone magazine about what Mitt Romney used to do when he was in business. And just to explain this is a bit serious, but basically what he did in this company, Bain Capital, is he was running the company, and basically they would look for companies that were quite good companies but maybe going through a bit of a difficult period, share price was a bit down, and they would borrow loads of money from Goldman Sachs to buy a majority stake in the company. Then once they were in control, they would say that the company had borrowed the money from Goldman Sachs, so the company now owed the money back. And then, so the company, whatever problems it had before, now also owes, say, $250 million to Goldman.
Along with the other problems.
And the other problems. And on top of that, it now starts paying $3 million a year to Mitt Romney to consult and advise them on who they should fire to start dealing with their terrible cash flow problem. And either the company would survive and manage to pay off Mitt and pay off Goldman and somehow still stay in business, having lost a lot of jobs, or in most cases they went under and the whole company was destroyed. Mitt Romney walked off with a load of money, having not put any of his own money up in the first place. Goldman Sachs did quite well, but the company gets destroyed. And basically that makes Mitt Romney the political equivalent of a 40-year-old guy hanging outside a secondary school for girls at around 5 o'clock in the evening, just after detention when the troubled kids are leaving, going, hey girl, want a cigarette? Hey, I've got a friend who works down in Goldman, he can get you all the cigarettes you want. What he doesn't tell you is that as soon as he's got his way with you, then suddenly the price of cigarettes gets jacked up, and Mitt Romney starts giving you life coaching classes on how you should quit smoking because it's really bad for you, and maybe consider his hypnotherapy course for $100 an hour on how I'm Mitt Romney and I can help you quit smoking. And if you don't want to go with him, it's too late because he's already bought out your parents. It's kind of dark, but that's sort of what was going on. So it's stuff that sort of thing. That's the kind of calibre of stuff you'll hear if you want to come to the show.
I'm guessing that, I mean, you've touched on the Irish situation. I suppose in some ways the way we have bailed ourselves out, that sounds a bit like that double think of the Mitt Romney thing.
The thing is, the IMF has done exactly the same thing to Ireland. They've moved in, borrowed all this money from things that we can't possibly pay back, and now they're in charge of us. So there's kind of a parallel there that's quite interesting and worth looking at. So it's all sort of coming together in that odd way.
I don't know if you heard there was a letter in the Irish Times today, and there was some debate earlier on Liveline about whether the Fringe Festival is or is not addressing the current situation of our current situation in Ireland, the recession, the difficulties that we're going through, etc.
Indeed.
On a serious level, is that the job of the festival, and is that what you want to do with your show?
Well, I mean, certainly I'm generally interested in addressing the sort of overall state of the world. I don't do too much personal stuff because I feel there are enough people telling jokes about their life and their personal experience, although obviously everyone does some of that. I'm afraid I was working all day and I was doing other things and working on the show, so I actually didn't hear any of Liveline or the debate, but I was aware it was on. I think our art does have a duty to address the issues in society. I think there are a lot of different ways you can do that. And of course, with art, everyone's got their own opinion on it, and everyone's got their view of, well, this is how it addresses it in this way. Fringe festivals, not the Dublin Fringe now, but I mean, they can be a bit of a bubble. I was in the Stockholm Fringe Festival, and I heard an actual human being say the sentence, "I really want to work with refugees and the circus." And I just went, what planet do you... Or, I was in another festival in the UK where I heard somebody say, so are we going to the Alternative Economic Forum later? No, we're going to massive cock drawing. Sorry. And those are the two options. And so you can be in this sort of artistic bubble sometimes, and I think it's important to sort of notice that. I try to, in my work, it's up to other people to decide how well or successfully I do that. I've actually been doing a barter comedy tour around the country where I do a whole load of shows about the financial thing with a friend of mine, Aidan Killian, and all those shows are free, so anyone can come along to them, but we then have no money and nowhere to stay and no food, so we ask the audience to either put us up for the night or feed us, or if they can make a donation towards petrol or whatever, that'd be great. And that's been really interesting, and we've met some very interesting people who are in different situations, and the reason we did that is because we wanted people who are distressed, who maybe haven't got 10 quid to spend on a night out, to do that. Another thing we're doing to save a little bit of money is Dead Cat Bouncer, a brilliant actor, doing a show in the same venue as me at 9 o'clock on Smock Alley all next week, and I'm on at 7. So if you want to see both of those shows, if you phone the Fringe and you use the code word clowns or revolution, you can see both those shows for a discount. So you see the two shows together, and that's we're trying to do a bit, but we have to live as well.
Clowns revolution is the code word.
Clowns or revolution, whichever you feel like.
Right, okay.
Either one. Or you can say clown revolution, they'll probably give you the discount ticket. I don't think they're going to quibble at that stage.
The other thing, you were talking about Fringe festivals and the nature of festivals. You were working, was it in Yorkshire, the day that Pussy Riot were...
Yes.
Was it arrested or the day of the court case?
The day of the court case, I was doing a festival in Yorkshire, and I went on stage wearing a sort of a pink Pussy Riot mask. And I did it... I mean, obviously I wanted to show solidarity with Pussy Riot, but also in the back of my head was, I'm an Irish comedian. This is the only chance I will ever get to be cheered on stage by a tent full of English people for wearing a balaclava. I just couldn't resist, and there was a little part of me as well going, this is kind of for Pussy Riot, but it's also kind of for the gay, lesbian, transgender wing of the IRA, who are the only splinter group committed to cherishing all the children of the nation equally. So it's a bit of that going on as well.
There is no area, I presume, Abie, that you would consider off bounds for comedy?
I think there's humour in everything. I think what's going on in the moment in the Middle East is quite interesting from that point of view, because I think you've a responsibility to do things... like the freedom of speech is great, and I believe in it, but I think that... even just to yourself as an artist, you've got to say something that's worth saying or that contributes something to the greater cause of humanity. I actually did a blasphemous comedy show in Pakistan about 5 years ago, which was called Jesus, the Guantanamo Years, and as many of your listeners will be aware, Jesus is a prophet in Islam, so any depiction of him on stage in any way is blasphemous, and if the Taliban had their way, I would be stoned or killed or something. But because what I was doing was about Jesus, was actually trying to stay true to the spirit of Jesus and imagine what he would think if he came back now, and of course Middle Eastern guy with a beard wants to be a martyr. The Americans aren't going to let him in. They're going to think he's a terrorist and he goes to Guantanamo. But it was Jesus looking around Guantanamo going, sorry, how did you take all that stuff about loving each other and being nice, and how did that become let's torture people and not give them trials? You know, and there are still people in Guantanamo. It's still a live issue. And because I was making a point that it was sort of had some humanitarian sense, and because, you know, the blasphemy was not done just to be gratuitously offensive and stupid, but was actually done to draw attention to an injustice, the audience had no problem with it. They embraced it and went, that's great, you know, and they appreciated somebody from the West having a go at Western foreign policy.
Also, your wit and your humour it's very verbal, you know,
yes.
and it's quite clever verbally.
I live in my head.
Is that difficult when you're taking a show abroad then?
It depends. I was in Sweden, as I mentioned, and I was terrified in Pakistan because I was like, this is, you know yourself, if you've seen American comics, sometimes even in Ireland, they're like, they just doesn't quite translate. And I was thinking, I'm going to Pakistan, like, how many degrees of separation is that? But to my shock and amazement, they really, really, like, they embraced it more fully than I'd almost ever seen an audience. I think it's because when you see comedy for the first time, it's very exciting. Like, when I remember as a kid seeing, like, going, oh my God, you're allowed to just stand on stage and be funny. That's brilliant. And most of these people hadn't seen live comedy because there's not a big live stand-up scene in Pakistan. I think they were also happy to have somebody from the West who knows a bit of Pakistani history and a bit of Muslim culture. Not much, but, you know, more than the average maybe. But yes, so I live in my head, I do. And finally, it is tricky. You translate it, but you work out what people will go with. And the great thing with comedy is you tell a joke, and if it doesn't work, you know straight away. So you very quickly move on to something that does.
The fact that this revolution, unlike Gil Scott-Heron's, this one will be televised, it will be retweeted, and it will be available on 4oD. Are you having a go at new media?
I'm sort of just acknowledging the reality of we live in this world of, like, what do we want? Global justice! When do we want it? In 140 characters! It's that sort of world of, you know, people thinking, and my friend Magnus Bettner, Swedish comic, talks about this, that, you know, people think that because they retweeted something with the hashtag Egypt, they feel they were part of the revolution. And, like, in some tiny way, maybe a little bit, but also there's a level of conceited self-involvement in that I think has to be mocked and laughed at. And I include myself in that because Twitter is a bit like that. I think, was it Rommel had this army going across the desert? There was like about 20 guys, but they got into jeeps and they just drove across and made so much sand and sort of noise. It just looked like a huge army. My numbers aren't exactly right there, but basically it looked bigger than it was. And I think Twitter can be a bit like that, where it looks very visible, but it's not actually that significant necessarily. We'll see.
Remind us of the words to use if you're phoning the Fringe Fest.
So if you want to see me and Dead Cat Bounce, say Clowns or say Revolution. But if you just want to see the show, it's at 7 o'clock all next week in Smock Alley, which is just beside Parliament Street on the Quays in Dublin.
Absolutely. Preview on Monday, opens on Tuesday, runs through to Saturday, and it's a part of the Absolute Fringe Fest.